Hello and welcome to this special episode of Stranded Panda, Make Matt Watch Star Wars, also known as this episode of the Star Wars Universe podcast, where we're talking about the Kenobi show. This is going to be a journey we're taking with Matthew Carroll, who is on record of not being the biggest Star Wars fan in the world, but wants to know more and has been, we've been talking about having him we've been talking about having him jump into a show at one point, and the show is going to be Kenobi. So we're going to he's taken some time to go through the Clone Wars episodes, to go through some of the older versions of Kenobi. We're going to talk about it with him, bringing on some other guests as well, all getting ready for the Kenobi TV show that will be going live on Disney Plus on May 25th. So we'll get back to all that in just one moment. After this commercial break, we have no control over. Welcome back. I'm Matthew Fox, your host. I'm joined by Matthew Carroll. Matthew, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Ready to Star Wars it up.
I like it. So let's kind of just start right there, because this is for folks who don't really care about the different personalities on here, we are going to talk mostly about Kenobi, I promise, and in later episodes we're going to get just about the Kenobi stuff. But Matt, you've had kind of such a journey with Star Wars, and I think for a while on the podcasts and on the feed, on the chat rooms and stuff, we've had kind of a good-natured banter, but you being the Star Trek guy, me being the Star Wars guy, and kind of who likes which more and things like that. And it's been kind of a joke of are we ever going to get Matt to actually watch some Star Wars and talk about some Star Wars? Mm-hmm. And I've been kind of always hey, the door's always open. And so a couple days ago when you messaged me and was like, hey, I actually want to watch this Kenobi show, and I'm watching some old, stuff with Kenobi in it, especially the Clone Wars, to get ready for it. Tell me more about what made you decide to do all this.
Yeah, man. So, I obviously this is the Star Wars Universe podcast. Please forgive me, my friends. I come in peace. This is a gesture of peace, I promise. I grew up watching Star Wars too. It just wasn't my fandom growing up. Yeah, so I don't have the same nostalgia that everyone has for Star Wars. I mean, I do. My dad showed it to me as a kid, but Star Trek was this weekly part of my life, whereas Star Wars was the movies I saw a couple times. They just weren't the thing that I had on repeat, and the lore never, not to say it never resonated with me. I enjoyed it, but it just didn't have the same resonance that something like Star Trek or even Marvel or whatever did. And so when I've watched this more recent stuff, I'm kind of yeah, it's fine. I feel like sometimes on the new shows they have weighted so heavily for the nostalgia that it takes, as a non-Star Wars fan, because I just don't, this is the thing. So you talk about Matt's finally going to watch Star Wars. I've seen almost everything, except for the animated stuff. I just haven't seen the animated stuff. I've seen everything live action. So it's not like I don't watch the stuff. I enjoy it when I watch it. It's just a matter of, it's just not my fandom, so it's not the thing that I gravitate to. So I thought it'd be interesting. I've been meaning forever, and I think you were one of the people who has kind of told me this. One of the things that I consider about Star Wars, and the reason that I don't like it as much, is that I find the characterizations thin.
Right.
And part of that is the fact that on a TV show, you get 20 episodes to explore a character. And I've only seen these movies, so it's you get 2 hours, right. So they're archetypes to me more than they are characters. But everyone has been telling me for years that the Clone Wars is the thing to go watch, because you start at the beginning and you really get the relationship between Kenobi and Anakin and Ahsoka, and they start to really become real characters. And that combined with Ewan McGregor, who I actually really love from just other things, right. Combined with it being the new Star Wars show, I was I think I'll see this, I really, yeah. So I've even watched all the Mandalorian, all the Book of Boba Fett, all that stuff. I just, again, it's just oh, that was fun. It's just not my fandom, but, I'm really excited about Kenobi, so I thought this was a good time to go through the Clone Wars, I'm not even watching them all. I looked up a guide online that's like, here's the episodes of Clone Wars to watch, because I've just heard, and I've tried to watch it in the past, and it's like I get 3 episodes in and I'm like, there's a lot of just kiddie stuff here.
There's a lot of filler. There's a lot of stuff for kids. Yeah,
that's what I've been told. So I found a list of like, here's the 5 episodes you need to watch from season 1. Here's the 10 episodes you need to watch from season 2, and you can tell it gets better because as the Clone Wars guide that I'm following goes on, it's like, it is like that. It goes up, up, up every season. And the last season, it's like, no, you just need to watch it all. You just watch the whole thing. Yeah.
No, I think it's so interesting. And one thing you're actually kind of helped me see that I never really realized is the Star Wars fandom, the way we talk about that, is in many ways, at least as broad as it is now, a much more recent development than the Star Trek one. Because, I mean, first of all, Star Trek starts, about 10 years earlier. It starts in the 60s. Star Wars starts in the 70s. But then, you and I are of similar generations. You're a couple years younger than I am, but we're pretty close. We're both old fogies. And, growing up, there was all of this Star Trek on TV all the time. First there was the original series in syndication, and then there was 6 different movies that came out, and then even more with the Next Generation ones. And then there was 3 different 21 seasons of television between the 7 of Next Generation, DS9, and Voyager. Meanwhile, there were literally 3 Star Wars movies.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was this Star Wars Legends canon of the books, and that had a very big fandom, which is awesome, and I think it's wonderful. But book fandoms are almost always going to be a lot smaller than TV show fandoms. And I think so in many ways, like I would have said I am a huge Star Wars fan, but I don't think I was part of a Star Wars fandom when I was a kid because I don't think it really existed in the same. I mean, it did for the books, but that was much harder to access in a lot of ways. At least
for sure. And I knew a lot of people and that's the thing is like when you're growing up and that whole Star Wars versus Star Trek sort of thing is happening. For me, I was just always like, yeah, Star Trek. I like watch it every week. And like, I actually, and I even read a lot of Star Trek books, and I tried to get into the Star Wars books at some point. Cause I was like, I knew people who loved that fandom. And I also know people that like, it's kind of the same as I mentioned with the Clone Wars, where you have like this deep breadth of characters that you build over books that you just can't do in 6 hours of movie. Like literally for like most of our childhood, there's only 6 hours of this stuff on film. And I just never got into the books partially because I wasn't into the characters that much. Yeah. Whereas I did get into them with Star Trek characters, I'd read a lot of those books.
And I think, not everyone, but I think even a good deal of the most ardent Legends Star Wars fans will admit there are some very, very good Star Wars books that add quite a lot to the stories, and it's like a shame that some of them are non-canonical, although their ideas are often becoming canonical. Thrawn being the best example of that, who's now very much canonical. But also, there was a period of time where the editors of the Legends canon, what they just call the Star Wars Extended Universe at that point, were like, oh, it's a Star Wars book. Cool. We'll publish it. Like the Clone Wars themselves, there's a lot of dreck to kind of get through. Sure. But I think one thing that's happened is, that now, once the Clone Wars started, and then Rebels started, and then all these other TV shows. So now, like, Star Wars has a very similar fandom to Star Trek, but it didn't when you and I were kids. So I think that kind of makes a lot of it happen.
Yeah. Well, and even more than like Star Trek, the thing about Star Wars that you also have to like, I think about is Star Trek is very much the morality play every week. You have a different little thing. And I think Star Wars is much more just the hero story, the hero tale being told in kind of this circular manner, the hero's journey circle or whatever. And I think like that is much more like Marvel is. But what I love about Marvel and Star Trek is the deep universe and having this sort of like expansive, you can grab this character from this other show and drop him in this show, and you just have all this weight is immediately put on that moment because you know that character well. And, we all saw that with Book of Boba Fett recently. I'm sure everyone listening to this has seen that. I'm sure, just didn't want to spoil. So spoiler alert. But yeah, dropping the Mandalorian in episode 5 or 6 or whatever that was just like it was a breath of fresh air because we had this the Mandalorian shows. I'm like, oh, I know this story. I'm totally into, I'm into, I know what's going on here. And I couldn't believe they spent 2 whole episodes on that. That was, I'm sure y'all have talked about it, but that's nuts.
Yeah. I love it. A lot of people don't. That's a whole other story. I think in some ways, though, because I know I've always wanted to push back a bit and say, I think Star Trek is much more like on the surface, clearly ethical questions. I think Star Wars does have some very good ethical questions that we actually just talked about in an episode of the Orville that will come out a couple weeks after this one. But, about like temptation and like what does hating evil do in terms of like, the dark side and all this kind of stuff. And I think much more of that gets developed in the Clone Wars and in some of the later stuff. But I think it's kind of perfect that Kenobi is where we're going to start, because to me, Kenobi is a very morally gray character in the Star Wars movies, in terms of him like trying to keep Luke on this particular path, but also lying to Luke and all this stuff. And let me just kind of start there. Like, cause I think for a lot of folks, I think one of the best things about the Star Wars stuff that's coming out now, and one thing I'm really trying to push with this podcast is, I don't think in the same way that like, I think it's fine. Back that up. When I come on the MCU podcast or I write into you guys, I always like joke and say, look, I'm a dirty casual. I love the MCU movies. I don't watch them 10 times each, and I haven't read all the comic books. And I like that the MCU stuff is as much for me as it is for the most hardcore comic book fans.
Right.
I want this podcast, and I think Star Wars in general, like, sometimes it's a little more nostalgia than maybe it should be, but I think for the most part of the idea should be you can enjoy the new Kenobi show if you know everything about Kenobi. You also should be able to enjoy it, though, if you just remember Kenobi from the original movies or the prequels that you saw 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So let me kind of just start there. Like, going into this watch of the Clone Wars, for you, what's your impression of Obi-Wan Kenobi as a character?
It is very much as I mentioned, I think of Star Wars in archetypes for the most part, because I haven't had a deep experience with Kenobi. I think of him as, the good-natured teacher. You know what I mean? Like, he is the archetypical sacrificial good-natured teacher. That is the role sort of picked up by Yoda in the next movie. But yeah, and there's, that's one of the things that is evocative about the first film for me, is that the idea that he has this deep relationship with Vader that we just don't know about at that point. I loved that as a kid. I loved the fact that this universe has existed prior to now is fascinating, and it's like it makes your brain light up. It makes you imagine what their history could be. Exactly. Of course, now we've seen the prequels and we know what their history was, and I enjoy their relationship. I think in that is something that is like one of the better things in those movies, that they're trying to explore their relationship.
Definitely. Well, especially because I think, and it's subtle, and so like it may not be the thing that stands out for people. But so much of what I get when I watch those original Star Wars movies, the original trilogy, is Obi-Wan's feelings of regret, of that he has, that whatever happened to Darth Vader, and you're right, at that point we don't really know what it is, but he has some sense of guilt and some sense of, I screwed up. I thought I could be the teacher Yoda was, and I couldn't. And now I'm going to fix it, and I'm going to do better with Luke, and I think it's one thing that the prequels then explore even more, and then, as you said, the Clone Wars are going to do in even more detail, is really getting to see that. To see, like, what did Obi-Wan do right? What is Obi-Wan maybe blaming himself for that he shouldn't? And what did he actually, have problems with? Because in those original movies, part of what winds up happening is he lies to Luke, and he tells Luke, your father was murdered by Darth Vader. When in actual, the reality is that his father became Darth Vader. And as he famously says, well, so in a way, your father was killed by Vader if you look at it from a certain point of view. Mm-hmm. And to me, I love that, because you're right, it's taking that mentor idea, but it's also going one step further, though it's also, again, now a trope of the mentor is kindly and good and self-sacrificing, but also only gave you the information that the mentor thought you should have. And so now the hero has to realize, like, my mentor wasn't perfect.
Yeah. Well, I guess I never thought about it as if he's not perfect. Mm-hmm. I thought, I guess I have this archetype of him being this like good and right decisions, and he told him what he needed to know at the time. Right. Like Luke wasn't ready to know. And I think there was a fear of him letting him know that his father, because you find out your father is alive and is around, and he didn't die as a pilot for the Republic or whatever, and you want to like run off and find him, and he knows that Luke isn't ready for that, and he knows that Luke kind of needs to, and he sort of it is like there's a darkness to it because he kind of knows he needs to radicalize Luke against Vader before he knows he's his father. You know, like he needs to wait until he's hanging on by one hand to find out that that's his father in front of him. You know,
right?
And I think that there's something in Obi-Wan that knows that, and that like knows that Luke has darkness in him too, and he doesn't want to let Luke be convinced by Vader, which Vader tries to do later.
Right. Yeah, I think I watched these movies last night again. I know you watched them many years ago.
Been a few years, yeah. I think I rewatched the first one before. Oh gosh, what was it? The before the more recent trilogy began.
Oh yeah,
that's the last time I watched it.
But even that's still a good 8-10 years.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Because to me, one of the things that strikes me so much is that like I think absolutely everything you're saying about Obi-Wan is right. I think though the part of what is proven by the end of it is that Obi-Wan was wrong. Because Obi-Wan thinks like you have to kill Vader, you have to go this far, and of course it ends up with that Luke was able to resist Vader in the way Obi-Wan and Yoda thought he couldn't, and so yeah, to me it's just such an interesting dynamic as well, seeing all that.
That's a classic question though, is like, was he wrong? Because like yes, I think the way that he's wrong specifically is that he no longer believes Anakin's redeemable.
Right.
And that's pretty dark because the thing that Luke is able to like, I do think that he's trying to protect Luke and he's trying to keep Luke on the side of the light when he doesn't tell him the truth. I mean, okay, being real, I don't know that when they wrote that movie, they knew they were going to make Vader the father. I kind of wonder. But I wonder if that mistake or like him being like that lie was just a problem of the script writing. Originally, I don't know. You may know.
My understanding is that they just that Lucas had played with the idea, but that it wasn't like officially decided until they started writing the second movie. So yeah, gotcha. So like there's an extent to which like the way they phrase it as how he did it is kind of a retcon, but also makes total sense with how I think they leave it open ended enough in the first movie that it's not like they're compromising it, but yeah, they weren't necessarily intending for that. Right.
Well, Vader means father in German, right? Like, isn't that a thing?
Does it?
I believe so.
Okay.
Oh, a Dutch word for father is Vader, according to Google. I've always heard that, but I just believed it from kids on the playground. I never looked it up, but Google is saying it's a Dutch word for father.
Kids on the playground was our generation's version of I read it on Twitter.
Exactly. And it's so funny because now we have all the internet at our disposal and we still aren't sure if it's telling us the truth. Like it's still kids on the playground. It like really is.
And I think it's a fun question for us to talk about because my understanding is, this is going to be a big part of what this upcoming show is going to be about, because this show is now about Kenobi dealing with the fact that he couldn't save Anakin. And like his guilt about that, and him trying to come to terms with that, as well as having to face Anakin again. Because I think one reading of it could be, and this is, I think, you can call this projection, and I'm not sure, but is that part of why Obi-Wan, like, if I decide someone is unredeemable, that means that it's not entirely my fault that I couldn't redeem them.
Sure.
And so it's like that, and not that he's even intentional, but that's part of what Obi-Wan's wrestling with. And so I think this show, I think, is going to be a really interesting way to kind of explore that further.
Absolutely. And I do think there's like I wonder, you say that, and I wonder if it's going to be the opposite. I wonder if it's going to be, well, not the opposite, but him coming to that decision and real, like something happening between him and Vader, like, because apparently they're going to have some sort of interaction in this show. And being like, he truly is gone, like I better not tell his son that he's his father. You know what I mean? Like, if that's why he lied, right? If that's why he lied because he was trying to protect Luke. But what he didn't realize was that Anakin was still in there, Anakin could still be brought out. And like, yeah. I think there's a lot of fascinating stuff there, and I hope that they deal with like that. Just that simple question of like, why did he lie?
Right.
Why did he fear Luke going to Vader so badly? What is his final experience with Vader? Like, that's such a fascinating question that I really hope they bear down on it. And I hope it's not like, what made him stay in the desert all that time, you know? Because you can imagine, I don't know what they're going to do here, because I don't know if Vader's going to be hunting him on Tatooine, if he's going to leave Tatooine. I don't know what this show's going to be about.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the prequels, because you said you really liked that. I think most people acknowledge the prequels are some people love them, and God bless that. I think there's some very good parts. I think some folks would say they're not the best movie making we've ever seen.
Sure.
But you said the one of the things you really liked was the Obi-Wan Anakin relationship in there.
Yeah, I liked it. I like that it is so explored, I guess. It is like, in many ways, it's what the movies are about, which I think is a smart decision.
Right.
Those movies are basically about that relationship. And I think a lot of what people complain about with those movies, and there's lots to complain about, are not that relationship. Like, when you think about the scenes that everyone makes fun of Anakin for, they're when he's with Padme, or when he's with Jar Jar, or when, you know, like, there's a lot of things that people don't like about Annie in those first couple movies, even the fact that people call him Annie. But like the him being a student of Obi-Wan, I don't think, at least to me, has never been like a thing that people focus on when they're trying to, you know, talk bad about those movies. I think that, you know, again, there are cheesiness to it. There's a lot of like, you know, memification of Obi-Wan, where he's like this sort of just smarmy guy. But I even like that Obi-Wan starts out as kind of the punk kid that Anakin is in the third one, you know? I don't know. There's something going on there about generational, like, teacher-student relationships and stuff that I like a lot.
Yeah. Well, especially since, you know, one thing that happens in the original movies is Obi-Wan keeps saying how much Luke reminds him of his father. And you can see how that's both like, you know, this is like having my best friend again, and also my best friend betrayed me and killed all of my friends, you know? And so that's so much of the mixing there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want this to go too long. These are kind of like short little things. So that's kind of all the setup as you were going into the Clone Wars. You've now watched a couple episodes of the season 1 of Clone Wars. What are some of your initial thoughts?
Okay. So as I said, the first season, it was like, just watch these 5. And they're pretty good. I do hope they get better. I am not.
They do. They do.
Yeah, that's what I hear. I am not so enamored with it yet, but I think so far I'm a little. The episodes it's had me watch have been very action centric to some degree, which you know, I'm a Star Trek fan. I like people sitting around long tables having discussions for 3 hours.
Yeah.
I like boring shows, you guys. Star Wars is far too interesting. No, I like I like where I can see where it's going. I like the character of Ahsoka a lot. And so far, to be honest, I just haven't gotten much. Like, it showed a couple cool episodes. It showed an early episode. I know the idea of the clones is an ongoing thing, like the clones sort of developing their story, which is really cool. And they've sort of differentiating themselves, and they showed one of those episodes in the first season. I liked that a lot.
Yeah.
And obviously with Bad Batch, which I've seen one episode of.
Right.
Obviously with Bad Batch, they take that idea even further. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't have like super strong feelings yet. I'm just getting started. So that's why I kind of thought this was a good, like, we'll talk about it in loose terms, because honestly, I haven't gotten much of anything out of the Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, Anakin relationship yet, which is really why I'm here. Yeah.
I think that's very fair. I think it does take a little while to find itself. I think the character of Ahsoka, certainly, I think there's a lot of things that happened during that prequel era, which is both the prequel movies themselves and the Clone Wars TV show and some of the other stuff around that, which was George Lucas having a idea of what kids wanted to make it more kid friendly that was kind of infantile in some ways. And I think Ahsoka is like, Ahsoka's one of those characters where, like, once Dave Filoni was able to be like, okay, George, I get your idea. How about you let me kind of? Why don't you go off and play in the studio and come up with some cool effects, and let me kind of play with this character. Really gets to take off. I'll also say that from the first season, both the budget for the animation and the animation technology improve significantly over the next couple seasons. Because I think, for me at least, the animation is so kind of basic.
It's stilted. It's a little like simple and stilted. Although like they know how to shoot an action sequence. It's a Star Wars thing. Yeah. You know, they do a good job on an action sequence, but I do kind of feel so far, and this is season 1, I know everyone tells me how much better it gets, which is why I had to do the whole like jump through the first season, because I've tried multiple times and I couldn't make it through the first season. So I'm not judging it on that. I just wanted to get through the key moments and get to the good
Star Trek
stuff.
Next Generation first season has some real stinkers.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. No, I think that's awesome, because I think that it's funny, as much as I love Star Wars, I'm like you. I do love some of the Star Wars fight scenes, but my favorite stuff is when they're sitting around tables discussing things. I think one of the plot lines that I think is going to get most... The two plot lines that I think I'm kind of most interested to talk about with you as we go forward. One is, like, we're going to see more and more glimpses of Anakin not being on the path of the straight and narrow. You know, him having some of these dark side tendencies, him fighting against the Council. And Obi-Wan being so torn between, this is my student, this is my friend, this is the person I want to protect, versus this is all the rules and stuff that I'm supposed to be believing in.
Absolutely. And then below that you have Ahsoka, who also has tendencies, not necessarily to the dark side that I've seen, but to bristle at the Jedi Order and the sort of like rules. So she's pushing back constantly. In the little bit I've seen, she's kind of pushing back. And I think that idea is super interesting. I mean, even it's almost like this whole story is a story of a line of teachers and students all the way back from Qui-Gon Jinn, who ignored the Council's advice to train Anakin, which was really the inciting incident that led to all of this, you know, that then then Obi-Wan takes up that sort of impetuous decision and says, okay, well then I'll do it in his name, you know, sort of. And so then he takes on Ahsoka, and it's just this line of sort of like, all three of them are sort of this like impetuous young student that is sort of like trying to grow through that. And I love that idea. I love it. I've really liked Ahsoka in The Mandalorian too, and Book of Boba Fett. So I really want to see more. I want to know where her origins come from. I think as much as we're doing this watch is about Obi-Wan and the new show, it's just as much about just like finding out where Ahsoka comes from.
I think it makes sense. And I think, frankly, we may actually, with all of this, I think, because I think the thing that connects Obi-Wan and Anakin and Ahsoka is tied to a topic that I know is very dear to your heart, although sometimes you may want to talk about it more or less, which is religion. Because to the extent it's a lot of the story of the Clone Wars, I think, is about the fall and corruption of the Jedi and these kind of members of the priesthood for all intents and purposes. And what do you do when, you know, like... Christ, in Christianity, this story is told in terms of what Jesus' experience is with the people of his day. But almost every religion, there's a story of this at some point, where the religious leaders of the time become, they kind of forget that they're supposed to be the path to the divine and start thinking that they are the divine, and that any question of them is wrong. And that's very much the story of the Clone Wars. And that's, I think, going to be the other big thing that I think you'll be really interested in, because, again, this is much more the ethical stuff. That's not easy. It's much more like sitting on a table figuring it out. Is what does it do to the Jedi, especially to Obi-Wan, to now be the generals who are ordering these clones to their deaths, you know, and that the clones are not fully human, as they're taught at least. And what does that mean to, you know, so I think Obi-Wan's relationship to the clones and the degree to which he does or doesn't become friendly with them and is willing to sort of sacrifice them in battle versus Anakin being fiercely devoted to them is I think it's one more sign of just how complex this will all get.
Yeah, there's an episode in season 1 that I watched that was interesting that they chose it on this list. And now that we're talking about this, I'm seeing the themes that are there. It's the episode of Grievous's Lair. and it's about Kit Fisto and his Padawan fighting in Grievous's lair. And the thing is, like, that, you know, I didn't really realize they'd do that. I guess I knew that they were sort of like, it's sort of an anthology where they grab different stories from different parts of the time period. But the idea that this episode does not have any, it has a couple moments where I think they talk to Obi-Wan or something, but it's not about any of the main characters that I knew. But what is interesting about that episode is that Kit Fisto's Padawan is very impetuous, and he's angry, and he has moments in there where he disregards the lives of the clones, and he also blames the clones for his mistakes, and that Padawan ends up dying in that episode, and he makes impetuous decision after impetuous decision. And I kept thinking, like, this episode is sort of a morality play for telling us what happens to a Padawan who, you know, goes so off the rails, which is interesting because we've got Anakin and Ahsoka who are both always pushing that direction. Yep. And often they seem, at least in the first season, they seem to kind of get away with it. But this other Padawan who's doing similar things does not get away with it. He dies.
Yeah. No, I think it's right. I think it's very intentional, kind of as a foreshadowing of so much we're going to go through, both in terms of the Padawan who pushes things, but also in terms of that relationship with the clones, you know, because I think, and in this regard, like, I know you talk about this all the time, and it's something we both care about. I love when these stories hold up a mirror to our own world, you know, and where, like, in the Orville, we love how some of the stuff about the Mocklins and things in, you know, in Star Trek as well, you know, it's totally different, but it makes us think about things in our own world. And I know, you know, I used to be really into kind of military, like, ethics and justice and strategy and things like that. And one thing that a lot of generals would talk about is this, you know, that there's a need to, as a military leader, be somewhat detached from the soldiers you're commanding, because you have to order them into situations where they're going to be put in danger and they may be killed. Mm-hmm. And that can be both, like, they can be a problem to be too connected from the military standpoint, which I think we can say is problematic, but that it also can be a problem to be so far unconnected that you have no compassion anymore. And I think that's where the Jedi are going to wind up being with the clones. And I think, that Padawan is a perfect foreshadowing of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great episode.
Yeah. Right. So, I'm excited to see where, you know, this is Clone Wars. I think season 2 has a lot more episodes, I believe, that it wants me to watch. So before we get together to do this again, I'm going to try to get through season 2. And I'm excited to see how it develops. And I only watching a few episodes like I have been, you know, it's developing. Hopefully will develop quickly.
Yeah, I think that'll be a good way to do it. We have, you know, we've got all of March, April, and May. I think kind of try to like one episode for each of those seasons that you watch. I think will be kind of a good way to, and then maybe watch a couple of the Rebel episodes, because they also take his story in some fun directions.
Yeah. So where does Rebels happen in the timeline? And go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so the timeline is, you know, you have the 2 prequel movies, then you have the Clone Wars themselves, and that's where this entire show that you're watching now takes place.
Right.
And then we have Revenge of the Sith, which is where the Galactic Empire is created and the Republic is overthrown. And then we have 19 years, because Luke is supposed to be about 19 years old. So 19 or 20 years from the birth of Luke and Leia and the birth of the Empire until the Star Wars movies starts with A New Hope and Luke and Obi-Wan going on this journey. So, and a lot of people have commented, like, look at Obi-Wan at the end of the last prequel movie, and then look at him at the start of A New Hope. That does not look like a man who's aged 19 years. That looks like a man who's aged 50 years, because Tatooine, I guess, is just really harsh sun. Mm-hmm. So Rebels starts about 4 years before. Everything is dated by the Battle of Yavin. You know, when the first Death Star is blown up. So it starts in the year 4 BBY, before the battle. So it's 4 years before the Battle of Yavin, 4 years before the New Hope movie begins.
Gotcha.
And then the show ends basically like the week that the Rogue One movie is taking place. Like, it goes right up to that point.
Oh, that's fun. Okay. And that was a more recent show, right, than the Clone Wars?
Was, I think still pretty. I think that was made before the post-Quills movie started coming out, but So I think it's maybe like 10 years ago, 10 years or so.
Cool.
I'll quickly look that up though. Hold on. Yeah, actually, it looks like I think Rebels actually ran concurrently to some of those movies coming out. Rebels started in 2014 and it ended in 2018. So. And
you mentioned that it tells some more of this story. Is it obviously Star Wars, but is it Anakin or do Anakin? I mean, obviously Anakin probably appears as Vader, but does Ahsoka or Obi-Wan appear in that show?
Yes. So Darth Vader continues to be a character, and he's mostly off screen, but he does appear on screen a couple times. Ahsoka does continue to be a character in that show.
Cool.
Obi-Wan does show up from time to time.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't want to give away too much because at the end of Clone Wars, Ahsoka's journey takes some really interesting turns, and that's kind of reflected in that. But yeah, a lot of these same characters do continue to pop up.
Cool. Yeah, depending on how fast I can get through Clone Wars, maybe I'll get to Rebels too. Cool. But yeah, I excited to see this series that everyone's been telling me for years. This makes those characters deeper, which is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think this is a lot more of the sitting around tables that you're looking for.
That is a joke, by the way. I joke about that because I just want things to have stakes, and often, especially in kids media, the action sequences have no stakes. Because they are, you know who's going to win, you know what's going to happen. Right. I did note that like there's a few battles in this. I mean, like I said with Kit Fitzstow's Padawan dying, people do. There are stakes in this, so I'm not, that isn't lost on me. But I do love an action sequence when it has. Yeah. When there's a reason for it, and we're not just like every week having the same battle with the same villain who goes back and laughs at their cave, and you come back out and fight, Yeah.
No, I definitely agree with that. And I think, I think I'm the same way. Like, I really enjoy some of the fight scenes in Marvel movies and DC movies or Star Wars movies, but there are definitely times where I'm like, you know what? Why can't we keep talking about it? I'm on record as saying that Captain America: Civil War is in my top 3, if not my actual favorite of the MCU movies. Mm-hmm. But if you had, the way that movie plays out is Tony says we need some kind of oversight. Cap says, okay, but the oversight you're suggesting is way too far, and then they fight. And if you actually gave us 20 more minutes of them and Vision and the rest of them sitting around a table discussing, should there be any kind of oversight? What should the oversight look like? I would love that. 3/4 of the audience would walk out bored out of their minds, but it's what I would love. So yeah, I think this would be more that kind of Star Wars. So, well, normally this is where I would ask my guest if they're doing anything in other places. I hope most of the Star Wars universe people know about Stranded Panda and all that, but just for anyone who don't, I'm just going to remind them, where can we find more Matt Carroll?
Yeah, man, strandedpanda.com has all the podcasts. Sort of the main thing we do is the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, at least that me and Ashley and Jeff do. Over there, and so check out the Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast. But also, we do the Star Trek universe, and also Pandavision and Bingers Assemble are kind of like all of the main shows that I'm on, and I love talking about all this stuff, man.
Awesome. So glad to have you on. It's gonna be really fun. To our audience, what do you all think of all this? How excited are you about the Kenobi show? Do you just have kind of vague memories of it from the original movies? Have you been kind of following with Clone Wars, the books, or any of this stuff? What do you care about? Do you think Kenobi was right or wrong in how he treated Luke? Let us know. You can find all the ways to contact us by going to theethicalpanda.com. There you'll find our Facebook, Twitter. You can find ways to leave reviews for us, to participate in our fan survey, give us more information about what we're doing right, what you want to see us done better, but mostly just ways to contact us. Love hearing the contact. Love getting to have these conversations with you all. So thank you so much for listening. Matt, thank you so much for being a guest, and have a great day.